In the play King Lear, the character Gloucester has his eyes pulled out. And not long after that, someone comes along and wants to help Gloucester along the way. And he delivers this very powerful line. He says, "I have no way, and therefore want no eyes. I stumbled when I saw." When I had eyes, Gloucester says, I didn't see what I was doing. I didn't see my own cluelessness. And of course, cluelessness is easy to see in other people. When other people are being in some way clueless, they just don't seem to know what's going on. They have no idea of the effect they're having on other people. That's easy to spot in other people. Gloucester's situation, I think, is actually the common one, right? It's so difficult for us to see the ways in which we ourselves are clueless. I'm not sure that Gloucester ever completely gets it by the end of the play, but he does have moments of insight, and certainly this is one of those moments of insight. When I had eyes, I saw. I'm sorry, when I had eyes, I stumbled. I didn't see. Now that my eyes have been plucked out of my head, I have some insight into what's happened. Well, let's go to the beginning of the play, where the characters Kent and Gloucester, they're speaking about affairs of state, and then in comes the character Edmund, who is Gloucester's son. And so Kent asks Gloucester, "Is this your son?" And Gloucester says, "His breeding has been at my charge. I have so often blushed to acknowledge him that now I am braced to it." The only thing I want to point out here is to notice that Gloucester seems to be saying, yes, Edmund is my son, but I've been kind of embarrassed to acknowledge it beforehand. But I've gotten used to acknowledging that Edmund is my son. And of course, Edmund is standing there listening to this. The dialogue continues. Kent says, "I cannot conceive you." In other words, I don't understand what you mean. Gloucester says, "Sir, this fellow's mother could." So playing on that word conception. Kent saying, "I don't understand." Gloucester referring to, biological conception. "This young fellow's mother could, whereupon she grew round-wombed, and had indeed, sir, a son for her cradle, before she had a husband for her bed." So in other words, Edmund was conceived out of wedlock, born out of wedlock. And then Gloucester says to Kent, "Do you smell a fault?" In other words, do you think that, do you want to be critical of me since I've just acknowledged that Edmund was born out of wedlock? Now notice Kent's, and he puts Kent in a somewhat awkward position. I mean, what's Kent supposed to say? Edmund is standing right there. So, maybe we get a little bit of insight into Gloucester's cluelessness because he puts Kent in this somewhat awkward position. But Kent very courteously responds, "I cannot wish the fault undone, the issue of it being so proper." So in other words, well, Edmund seems like a good guy. I mean, what little interaction I've had with him thus far, and just seeing him here, he seems like a good guy. So Kent says, "Of course I don't want to be critical." Gloucester continues. He says, "I have another son by order of law, some year elder than this, who is yet no dearer in my account." So I have another son born within wedlock. Now notice that he implies that Edmund is dear to him. So he says, "My other son, Edgar, is not dearer to me, even though he was born within wedlock." But, we don't have a lot of information thus far, but what Gloucester has said thus far, does it really indicate to us that he holds Edmund dear? He says that he has been embarrassed to acknowledge that Edmund is his son in the past. That doesn't seem to be the kind of language that conveys a sense of dearness. Perhaps Gloucester is just, in his own mind is being lighthearted. Perhaps he's kind of joking around in his own mind in a loving way. But of course, as we go on, it doesn't take us long to discover in the play that this is not Edmund's perception. Edmund does not perceive that his father loves him. In fact, Edmund becomes enraged and will and will put into effect a conspiracy against his father. Gloucester continues, though this knave came something saucily into the world. Now he's calling Edmund a knave. Now this word knave is used elsewhere in the play in a very critical way, in a manner. It's the character Kent who calls someone else a knave. And the purpose there is to put that person down, the person that Kent is speaking to. And so this word knave here is used. So now he's calling Edmund a knave. Though this knave came something saucily into the world before he was sent for. Now notice how Gloucester talks about Edmund's mom. Yet was his mother fair. There was good sport at his making. I mean, imagine being Edmund, standing there listening not only to his father putting him down, calling him a knave, saying that, yeah, I've been embarrassed in the past to acknowledge that Edmund is my son, but I've kind of gotten used to that. But now speaking of Edmund's mother in such a frivolous, casually dismissive way. Yet was his mother fair. There was good sport at his making. And the whoreson must be acknowledged. Now I have seen, editors who say that this word whoreson is meant in, sort of a joking way, or in an affectionate way. But that's really hard for me to believe. Edmund clearly does not hear these words in that way. As we've already said, he becomes enraged. And if Edmund is the whore's son, then what does that make Edmund's mother? But then notice how Gloucester speaks about Kent. He says to Edmund, do you know this noble gentleman? Edmund is a knave. Edmund has been a source of embarrassment for me. Edmund is the whore's son, but Kent is a noble gentleman. Attentive to the person with whom I work in the affairs of state. Not very attentive to, the emotional, psychological, relational well-being of my own son. Well, Edmund responds, no, I don't know, Kent. Look how Gloucester responds. He says, my Lord of Kent, remember him hereafter as my honorable friend. Here we go again. Edmund, his son, is a knave. Edmund, his son, is a whoreson. But Kent is honorable. Edmund responds in a courteous way, my services to your lordship. Notice Kent's polite response. 2 times Kent now responds politely. Kent says, I must love you and serve to know you better. Edmund responds, sir, I shall study deserving. Now at this point, Edmund seems like a pretty upstanding guy. It won't take us long to find out that he's full of anger, he's full of rage, and he will turn against his father and bring disaster on himself, on his father, and on others. The thing that I want to point out here is Gloucester's cluelessness. He seems not to be aware of what he is doing to his son. He seems not to be aware that he's treating this person with whom he works in the affairs of state. He's speaking of him in terms of honor. He's speaking of his own son in these put-downish terms that even if they are meant in Gloucester's own mind, even if in Gloucester's mind he construes himself as speaking affectionately of Edmund, it's hard to believe that Edmund would really accept those words as words of affection, being called a knave, being called a whoreson, the way his mother is spoken of so casually by Gloucester. Gloucester, I think, gets a little insight as the play goes on, and his eyes are pulled out, as this tragedy unfolds. One of the things that happened is Gloucester loses his eyes, and this person comes along and says, look, I'll help you on your way. And Gloucester gets a little insight. I have no way and therefore want no eyes. When I had eyes, I did not see. It's not clear to me that Gloucester really gets it, but at least he has some insight that When I had eyes, I was blind. Now that I'm blind, I see. At least he sees something. He seems to have some sense that Edmund's rage, which leads to a conspiracy, which plays into Gloucester losing his eyes and to the tragedy of the play, that Edmund's rage, we don't want to excuse it, but we can't understand it. Edmund's rage is in significant part a response to Gloucester's cluelessness, to Gloucester's blindness. And Gloucester seems to understand this a little bit, although, again, it's not clear to me that Gloucester ever completely gets it, because not long after he says, when I had eyes, I stumbled, he begins to cast blame once again on the gods. As flies to wanton boys are we to the gods, they kill us for their sport. What's happening to me is the result of, or what's happening to me is the work of the malevolent gods who pick at us the way boys might pick apart an insect. Well, I don't know. I think in this case the response to Gloucester is, no, Gloucester, actually, what's happening to you is significantly your responsibility because of your tremendous cluelessness. Now, Gloucester's case is obviously extreme, but there is an important lesson in here, and that is that it's easy to see the cluelessness of other people. Surely Gloucester could see other people's cluelessness. It's much more difficult to see the ways in which we ourselves are blind. And we need other people who care about us. And we need teachers like Shakespeare to point things out to us, to help us to see the ways in which we ourselves are clueless. The less cluelessness there is in the world, the better the world is. The less cluelessness there is in our own lives, the better our lives are.